Hello, my name is AJ Goldsby. I'm a life master from Pensacola, Florida, and I wanted to bring you a video today. This is Game 4 of the World Championship match that was played in November of 2014 between Magnus Carlsen and Viswanathan Anand. Carlsen did win the match. It was a hands-down win for Carlsen, although there were some tense moments in the match. But I did want to do a video on all of the games, and this will be my video for Game 4. The match at this point has already concluded, but nonetheless I want to finish my series of videos on the matches. We'll jump right into the game. In this game, this is Game 4. Magnus Carlsen is white and Viswanathan Anand is black. The game starts off e4, c5. Of course, that's a Sicilian. Now, in Game 2 of the match, when Carlsen was also white, Anand played the Berlin defense, which is, that's e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6. And Carlsen responded, d3. That was what was played in the second game of the World Championship match. And that was really a nice piece of psychology because basically Anand is playing Carlsen's own weapons against him. In other words, Carlsen is a great expert in the Berlin, and he plays it a lot as black. He plays both sides of it, apparently, but he plays it a lot more with black than with white. So basically, Anand was playing his own weapon against him. So that was a nice piece of psychology. But anyway, going back to the present game, this is only the second game where Carlsen is white. Anand, he chooses a Sicilian, so already we have a slightly sharper approach to the game than we had in Game 2. And Carlsen showed a good understanding, in the positional quiet waters of the Spanish in that game. So in this game, Anand decides to vary, and he goes with the Sicilian. Of course, when you're a master and you're playing for a win, or you're want to play an aggressive game of chess, the main choice most masters would go with, especially if they're in a situation where they're facing pawn to king 4 or one e2 e4 and want to win, the masters choose c5, the Sicilian, and that's a lot of masters' choice, against the king pawn opening. But anyway, knight f3, e6. And this move indicates black might play, the Paulsen or the Kahn or a Scheveningen. It could transpose to a lot of different variations. We won't really know exactly what Anand had prepared if Carlsen had played the main line, which of course is d4. C takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and now d6. That's the Scheveningen Sicilian, and of course g4 is a Kier's attack. So that was something else we could have seen, it'd be a totally different variation. But back to the actual game, e4, c5, knight f3, e6. Here, Carlsen played g3. Okay, this is very popular variant nowadays. You see a lot of grandmasters adopting this as white. Carlsen has used it several times. Two interesting games that I found in the database, just very quickly. I won't look at them. One was Anand versus Giri from the 2014 London Chess Classic. It was basically a blitz game, but it was a very entertaining game. Black won that game decisively. And also there was another game, I believe it was Kuzubov versus Ponomaryov. That was from the 83rd Ukrainian Championship, which was also played this year in 2014. And that game was a win for white. So we have a couple of games there. If you're interested, you can find any database or any online database and look those games up. G3 is an interesting way of avoiding a mainline theoretical battle. It has been popular, like I said, a lot lately. A very good in-depth discussion of this whole system can be found on Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez. He has a ChessBase DVD on this opening, and I have it. Someone sent it to me to review. So if you can buy or if you want to purchase a copy of that DVD, that is an excellent total in-depth coverage of the lines with G3 are also included in that DVD, and I highly recommend that DVD just in case you're looking to further your chess knowledge. But anyway, Carlsen played G3, which is obviously not that dangerous, and Anand just hits back in the center. He just goes with normal development. Knight c6, bishop g2, d5, e takes d5, e takes d5, 6 castles, knight f6, d4. And there's many ways that black can develop here. Sometimes he develops the bishop to d6 and puts the knight on e7. What Anand is doing is very classical, in my opinion. He's just putting the pieces on their natural squares and lets the chips fall where they may. Bishop e7, white plays bishop e3, Okay, there was one game I found in a database, knight c3, castles, d takes c5, bishop takes c5, a3. That was played in the game Zagantsev versus Rublevsky, and that was in this year. And supposedly Z is one of the great experts on the white side of this variation. So highly recommend that game if you want to see a theoretical battle there. That's in fact, look up Zagantsev. You spell his name ZVGAGINSEV in the ChessBase database. He's supposedly one of the great experts on the white side of this variation. So if you're looking at maybe some of the model games, he's definitely one of the ones you want to study to look at this variation. But back to our main game here. Knight c6, bishop g2, d5, e takes d5, e takes d5. Castles, knight f6, d4, bishop e7. White played bishop e3. And now black just plays c takes d4, knight takes d4. And basically what's happened here, if you'll notice, black has what's known as an isolated pawn, an Isolani. And when you have an isolated pawn, basically the general strategy is white wants to exchange pieces as much as possible. Black needs to avoid exchanges. And, supposedly, for a long time, grandmasters thought isolated pawn means absolute loss. And that's not the case. In fact, Tarrasch once said, he who is afraid of the isolated pawn should probably isolated queen pawn should probably give up chess. And I think he was right, because there's just a lot of systems where, you really can't avoid getting an isolated pawn. For example, the queen's gambit is white is a very popular variation. Black can force white to get a isolated pawn very quickly, but my opinion of those systems is that black does okay in those lines. But anyway, as does white. I mean, white can force an advantage too, and I don't think white has anything to fear in those lines. But knight takes d4. Now black's next move, bishop g4. You could almost give that move an exclam. It kind of discomforts Carlsen. In other words, he doesn't want to play f3 here. That just weakens white's position, weakens the e3 square, the bishop on e3 is hanging, etc. And also, too, it blocks in f3, f2 to f3, blocks in white's light squared king bishop there sitting on g2. So that's not a really good move to play. So basically, Carlsen's kind of forced to move his queen already, and he's already looking for a home. You don't want to play queen d2 because of knight e4 coming in right the next move. So the white queen really doesn't have a good move. He plays queen d3, and again, f3 was just plain ugly, and I don't think a grandmaster would have ever played that. Queen c1 was also to be considered there. But anyway, queen d3 is played, queen d7. Knight d2, black castles kingside. Castling queenside was an option. One of my former students in South Florida asked me why not castle queenside there for black, but I think that's a little bit dangerous. Normally, the normal rule of thumb is, you want to castle on the same side as your opponent, unless you really want an off-balance, all-out attack. Now, obviously, if black had castled on the queen side, we might have seen a totally different game than what we saw here. I think here, this is early in the match. The score is tight at this point, and I think basically both players are not really looking to go all out. So, I think that's probably for later on in the match. Knight at 2 to f3, rfe8, rfe1, bishop d6. Again, we have a nice development. Both sides have developed their pieces. A lot of centralization. Black's pieces are masked. Black does have the isolated pawn, but white's pieces aren't really ideally placed to exploit them. So, and the computer, for just about this entire game, the computer never varies too much from equal. I mean, maybe a few hundredths of a point here, a few hundredths of a point there, but it's really not enough to speak of. So, basically, the battleground is set. We have an isolated pawn. White would like to swap everything down and go to an ending where he could put pressure on the isolated pawn and maybe even win it, whereas black wants to keep pieces on and keep things complicated. Really, exchanges only favor the side that is playing against the isolated pawn, so black needs to avoid exchanges. But anyway, that's pretty much the whole game. C3, H6, the whole game strategy in a nutshell, if you will. And now white plays an interesting move. He goes queen f1. I didn't really like that move. I mean, there's a lot of different moves that white could have played there. I might have played rook c1. Rook d1's moving into a pin. I mean, there's a lot of different things you play. Well, he played queen f1 there. And now black's moves his bishop before it's kicked. White's preparing. One good thing about queen f1 is it prepares h2, h3, and basically now Anand runs before he kicks. He plays bishop h5. That wasn't the good move. The move that all the computers seem to like, all the engines seem to favor Houdini, Deep Fritz, etc., Stockfish. I could go on forever, but you get the general idea. The engines seem to like knight e4, and that was putting that knight on an outpost, protected by the rook, protected by the isolated queen pawn. That's the more thematic move. So I think that was probably the move there. But for whatever reason, after queen f1, Anand played his bishop back to h5, basically running before he was kicked. h3, bishop g6, rad1. Now here black played rad8. Another good move here, another possibility, was a6. A lot of the engines seem to show that in gives black a small edge, about 35/100ths of a pawn. A lot of the different engines picked that move, so that might have been a quite a significant improvement, because it seems to black seems to slowly get an edge if he had found that move and played it. But anyway, the actual move played in the game was rad8. Knight takes c6, b takes c6. Carlsen decided to swap the pawns off, kind of to ease the pressure there. And he feels like, black's endgame still isn't great, because now he's got 3 pawn islands. There's a pawn island here. These 2 pawns are another pawn island. And this isolated rook pawn is now a pawn island on the same diagonal as the bishop. So black's got an isolated rook pawn. So black's endgame isn't great. White will have 2 pawn islands in the endgame versus black's 3. So that's why Carlsen did that. It relieves some of the pressure, and it doesn't solve all of black's problems. I might not have gone that way. I might not have gone with knight c6, but again, it's difficult to suggest a plan. Rather, after bishop h5, we go back to this position: h3, r8, bishop g6, rad1, and now rad8. In this position, maybe I don't know, maybe just knight b5 here, attack the bishop and redeploy the other knight, or this knight could go back to b3 and the other knight could come to d4. That unclogs the bishop diagonal. That's one idea there. You can also play king h2. That gives the rook pawn a little bit more support, frees up the queen to be a ranger. I mean, I looked at a lot of different ideas. I spent actually several days analyzing this game with the engines, trying to come up with ideas, and I could sit here and talk about the game all day. I don't want this video to run overly long, so I'm going to cut it short there. But just to give you some ideas, there were other things that white could do in that position. Like I said, here Carlsen, basically to ease the pressure and maybe to give a different kind of look to the game, he decided to go knight takes c6, b takes c6, c4, bishop e4, bishop d4, and now he's threatening here to double the bishop pawns there. Bishop takes knight, g takes f6 is the main threat there. Knight h7, bishop c takes d5, bishop takes d5. So we're back now. Black's now got isolated rook pawn, isolated bishop pawn in an open file. Looks like his endgame's terrible. I thought this position must favor white, but when I fired up the engines and checked it on the engines, during the game, I was watching the game live. I remember seeing this game while it was being played, and I thought that white would be much better here. All he had to do was exchange a few pieces, but it turns out that things are not quite that easy. Rook takes e8, rook takes e8, queen d3, knight f8. Black's just rerouting his knight, getting his knight back into the game. Knight h4, bishop e5. Bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, and now just b3. Every trade seems to makes black's pawns look more vulnerable, but there's one problem with that. Anand's seen deeply into this position, and one of the problems white has is his king without his light squared bishop is very insecure, and also too his knight in very many lines is not a really good piece. It doesn't find an effective square, whereas many times black's piece does. So I think that basically, again, the engines consider most of the positions that result from this game dead equal. Knight e6, knight f3, queen f6, king g2, rook d8, queen e2, rook d5. Not a bad idea. I mean, one thing is he can threaten to make a battery on the d file with queen d8, so I don't know why people considered that bad. I mean, there were a lot of different alternatives. Just trading down might have been an option there too, but that was criticized by some of the pundits online. Rook takes d5, c takes d5, knight e5, queen f5, knight d3, knight d4, and here we come to a very critical position of the game. Carlsen, as white, decided to play g4. Ramirez called that a great practical decision. I don't necessarily agree. Black's got 3 major options. His clock is ticking. Of course, there's a lot of different things to calculate, but Anand basically comes up with a good move, just simply queen d7. I might have been tempted to go into the endgame after knight e2, g takes f5, knight c3, a4, king f8, but again, the engines say this is dead equal. It's not, there's really nothing there. I thought black would be much better because white's doubled isolated pawns on the f-file here. But the white king can sail up to d4 and attack this pawn frontally, so it's not that easy for either side. but apparently white's pawns are vulnerable too because of the doubled pawns. And apparently the engines, I thought, one side or the other would be much better here, but the engine says this position is pretty much equal. But anyway, g4, Anand respond with 34, queen d7, queen e5, knight e6, and we're about to trade the knights, and this is one of the areas that I wanted to concentrate in because we're getting into a very interesting queen and pawn ending. King g3, queen b5, knight f4, knight takes f4, king takes f4, and queen b4 check, king f3, and now d4. Black's going to sack a pawn here, but he's hoping that the activity of his pieces are going to be enough to draw. I'm not sure. I did analyze this game with computer. I'm not sure. I didn't save all my analysis. I looked at a lot of different things here, but this is a very active approach, and sometimes in queen and pawn endings, you have to take a very active approach. The pawn sack may just be best. I mean, Anand, both sides played this ending fairly well. Queen e8 check, king h7, queen takes f7, and now Anand plays a very good move. Queen d2 exclam. It's actually forced, but several the annotators, the one for ICC, the one for ChessBase, they all gave it an exclam. They said it was a pretty good move. Kazimzhanov, who is used to be Anand's second for a long time, said that Anand would absolutely find this move just by process of elimination, just because everything else is much worse. There's some different options there. When I give the links underneath the video, the box that says show more, I'll give the links, and I'll give the links to the ChessBase article, and you can download or open the PGN file for Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez Alvarez's analysis, and you can go through it yourself. But he makes some interesting observations there, and you can follow that if you'd like. Queen f5 check, king h8. Of course, that was absolutely forced. If king g8, that's just a bad mistake, because now we get into check, king h7, there, queen e2, and basically now the queen can get in front of the queen pawn, the king can attack the pawn from the side, and if black loses this pawn too, he's going to go 2 pawns down and could be dead loss. So this, after queen f42, queen f5 check, king h8 was absolutely forced. That was just like box. And now white plays h4. This is a very interesting move here. Queen takes a2, and now queen e6. Different ways to play this position. So many different. I mean, if you're really interested, you can fire up your own engine and go through this point. I just wanted to cover some things that I noticed. Now queen d2 again. The queen goes back to defense. This is very interesting. Several annotators, I did want to point out this because they made a mistake here, and I think this has to be addressed here. Several annotators said that a5 was just losing for black, and they give several different variations. I spent several hours with 2 or 3 different engines, Stockfish, Houdini, Deep Fritz, etc., and I can just absolutely tell you that a5 is not going to lose the game. My main line of analysis goes g5, h takes g5, h takes g5, king h7, queen f5 check, king g8, queen d3, and all the engines, the pawns are equal, and all the engines assess this position as fairly equal. There are some ways black can go badly wrong in that line. Just to point those out, after a5, g5, h takes g5, let's say instead of h takes g5, black plays a4. That leads to a forced checkmate, queen e8 check, king h7, g6 mate. That's just one way black can go wrong. Now going back to the main line, a5, g5, h takes g5, h takes g5. Now instead of, black should play king h7, but let's say he plays a4 here, then queen e8 check, king h7, b takes a4, and notice, the pawn, black's just dropped a pawn here. Some players would claim that this is an easy win for white. My experience has been there are no easy wins in any queen and pawn ending. Again, I spent hours and hours and hours on this game, and I never found a easy forced win from this line. It's probably a win if you want to put in hours and hours and hours and spend a couple hours on it, every move, and eventually you'll find a line that leads to a win. But it's very complex from here, and I never found an easy win for either side, especially for white from here. But again, white, the side that should be winning, if anybody's winning, would be white because he's a pawn up. But that's just the main thing I wanted to cover there, because several pundits, including Grandmaster Ramirez, had said that this a5 was just clearly losing, and several other pundits online picked that up, and they all gave a lot of those same variations, the checkmate and the dropping the pawn. But again, the main line there is, again, I'll just cover that one more time, g5, h takes g5, h takes g5, king h7, queen f5 check, king g8, queen d3, and Houdini and Deep Fritz, all the engines, Stockfish, all agree with those moves. They say those moves are the correct moves. So I don't know how they thought a5 was losing. maybe quick analysis. One of the problems with many of the annotators was they were putting their stuff out there the same day, and there was a tremendous amount of pressure to just to throw something out there. And I understand that, you know, instant analysis has its place. A lot of people, most people seem to be into that. They want to see some analysis, something thrown out there instantly. I'm the other kind of guy. I don't like to put anything out there till I've checked it, rechecked it, and rechecked it with a bunch of different engines, and I'm sure it's correct. But anyway, going back to the actual game, 43h4, queen a2, queen e6, queen d2. Again, the queen goes back to d2. Very important for the black queen to stay in the defensive battle there. And now queen e8 check, king h7, queen e4 check, king h8, queen e8 check, king h7, and they agree, shake hands and agree to a draw. Already this video has run 20 minutes. That's a little bit longer than I really wanted the video to run, but that's okay too. I did want to cover the important parts of this endgame. Again, it was a queen and pawn ending, and just for the novice or the player who's looking for some rules of thumb in a queen and pawn ending, there are several rules of thumb for queen and pawn endings that I think that are peculiar only to queen and pawn end games. And some of those things are queen activity. You don't ever want to get the queen inactive. I remember I've had several games where like I snatched a key pawn at a key point and a queen and pawn ending, and it actually cost me the game. So, you know, I had to learn that one the hard way by experience. So you want to keep the queen active. King safety is very important. Pawn structure and passed pawns. Those are all things that are high on your list of consideration if you ever find yourself in a queen and pawn ending. So maybe that'll help the novice or the average player. And I just wanted to throw that in as well, because this was a very tough queen and pawn ending. As I said, I spent many hours analyzing this game with several different engines trying to find out the truth of it. And it was a tough draw, and I think both players, they played almost 50 moves. They took quite a bit of time. I don't remember the exact amount of time consumption on the clocks. If I could, you know, it's already been played a couple of weeks ago. So anyway, bottom line is that, you know, that's the game. I believe this game was played on the 12th of November, so that's literally over a month ago now. But anyway, it was a tough game. It was a fair draw. I don't think either player ever missed an easy win or a forced win, nothing like that. Going through the game, I was struck with how many times it didn't matter which engine I fired up. The engines were always showing the, you know, most of the positions were either equal or very close to equal. And that pretty much concludes my video on this game. That's game number 4 of the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Viswanathan Anand. It was a draw in 47 moves. And thank you for watching my video. If you like my videos, you like my web pages, you'd like to support my efforts, please go to the PayPal website. That's www.paypal.com, and make a contribution under my email address, which is LifeMasterAJ@yahoo.com. Thanks for watching the video, and have a great day.